ASEAN Teachers #Upskill with Australia series. My name is Sri Gunathuran, and I'm the Business Development Manager for the Australian Trade and Investment Commission for Malaysia. And I will be your moderator for today. I'm actually joined by my esteemed colleagues in Austrade ASEAN as well as Austrade Australia. For those of you who've been joining us for our series and attended last week's sessions, thank you so much for doing so, and I hope it's been productive. For those of you joining for the first time, welcome to today's training session with our leading Australian institutions, the University of Western Australia and Phoenix Academy. Now, before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. Now, everyone has been muted when upon entry. Please keep your microphone and your cameras turned off so that we can conserve bandwidth usage as well as reduce background noise. Please also note that the audio might fluctuate during the webinar. For any questions regarding IT as well as on the topic, please feel free to use the chat functions to ask those questions. Please address it to all panelists when you're asking them. We will endeavor to answer all those that come through. Please also be aware that the webinar is being recorded and will be made available to all attendees as well as our internal staff via our Austrade website as well as other communication channels. If any attendees are not in agreement, please exit now. Now, before we kick off on the training, we have our first speaker who will provide a very warm welcome to everyone at the session today. May I welcome Mr. Daniel Havas, the Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner for Austrade Kuala Lumpur for Malaysia and Brunei.
Well, welcome everybody to the third session of Austrade's ASEAN Teacher Training Initiatives. Can I formally welcome all of our educators on the webinar today from right across the ASEAN region. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Australia has over 700,000 international students with over 22,000 courses from 1,100 education institutions. The universities partnering with us on this webinar series are all ranked in the top 200 universities worldwide. As you know, we're all coming into the 9th month of the COVID-19 pandemic, and many of you today have already adapted to the new normal, delivering classes virtually. The advantage of an online platform, of course, is the ability to bring together hundreds of participants, as we've done today on this webinar, to conduct a training directly from Australian experts who are sitting in Perth in Western Australia. Raising the quality of education is a priority for every ASEAN nation. Government agencies and teachers alike have been working hard to transition from conventional face-to-face teaching to a blended learning or indeed fully online learning. But teaching in this new normal has its fair share of challenges. As the father of 2 teenage sons, one of whom is doing his international baccalaureate program here in Kuala Lumpur, I see firsthand the challenges students have in remaining engaged in their programs and their education, and equally the challenges that teachers have in trying to keep their students engaged and deliver innovative programs to keep them engaged in their education. In the workshop today, Australian experts in teaching and education will provide an understanding of active learning in the context of English language teaching across both a blended and hybrid learning. Participants have the opportunity to maintain and explore practical applications of active teaching, as well as generating greater engagement amongst the students and between students and their educators as well. We understand that it's critical to maintain education continuity, as well as provide innovative and engaging ways to entertain and indeed keep your students engaged. With this in mind, please do take the opportunity to actively engage in today's session. If you have questions, please feel free to ask them using the chat function. And please also reach out to Austrade after the session for any additional information that you might need, or for the recording, which will be made available, as Sri has said. So thank you once again to all of our educators online today, and welcome to the session. And can I especially thank our partners today, the University of Western Australia, in collaboration with Phoenix Academy, for providing this afternoon's session, and I wish you all the very best for this afternoon and stay safe. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Daniel, for that very warm welcome. Now, as we kick off the training session, we have experts today from the University of Western Australia and Phoenix Academy talking about active English learning strategies in blended or hybrid classrooms. Now, this session will be segmented into 4 learning segments, and after each segment, there'll be a short Q&A. But don't worry, if there's questions that couldn't be answered, we will have a final Q&A at the very end of the webinar. So now, without further ado, may I introduce Associate Professor Mark Pegram from the Graduate School of Education in the University of Western Australia to start us off with technologies relevant for active learning.
Okay, thank you very much, Sri, and hello everyone from Perth, Western Australia, where our presenters are located. You can see an image of the Perth skyline on your screen right now. It's a great pleasure to begin today by talking to you about the use of digital technologies for active language learning. Before then handing over to my colleagues, we'll talk to you more about the implementation of blended learning and also how you can further your own professional development as a teacher. Everything that we talk to you about today will be connected with blended or hybrid learning in 2 definitions. So in a traditional definition, blended or hybrid learning refers to a combination of face-to-face or in-person or offline learning with online or e-learning. What happens at the intersection of the 2 is what we call blended learning. We know from a lot of research that there are advantages to doing some kinds of teaching and learning face-to-face and other kinds of teaching and learning online. So blended learning in this first definition is about finding the best combination of face-to-face and online learning for your students in your context. But there is a second definition of blended or hybrid learning that we've heard quite a lot about this year since the advent of COVID-19 and the massive shift to online teaching and learning. Traditionally, when we send students online, we either ask them to do asynchronous learning, where they work at their own pace in their own time, or we ask them to do synchronous learning, where they came together in the same space at the same time to interact with their peers and with the teacher. What we've realised this year through a lot more experience is that there are lots of advantages to blending asynchronous and synchronous learning. So if you're interested in this second definition of blended learning, you might also be interested in the term bichronous online learning, which some educators and researchers have recently begun to use to refer to the combination of asynchronous and synchronous online learning. And it's a term we may hear used a lot more in months and years to come. If you want to know still more about this, I would highly recommend an article that appeared just 3 months ago in the freely accessible EDUCAUSE review. It's called 6 Models for Blended Synchronous and Asynchronous Online Course Delivery. And as the name suggests, it goes through 6 different ways of blending together asynchronous and synchronous learning. So, as I said initially, everything that we talk to you about today will be about blended or hybrid learning, both in the sense of combining face-to-face and online learning, and when students go online, in the sense of combining asynchronous and synchronous learning. So, for the rest of my segment, I'd like to talk to you about new digital networks, new digital hardware, and especially new digital software, which is gradually opening up more and more possibilities for blended active learning. Let's take a jump back in history to begin with, to 1969, the year that the internet began, at which point it had precisely 4 connections, which you can see superimposed here on a map of the United States. If we were to try to map the connections on the internet nowadays, we'd end up with an image more like this one. And even this is just an artist's impression because it's impossible to capture the literally millions and millions of connections on the internet in any diagram visible to the human eye. So the internet actually grew quite slowly in the 1970s and 1980s, and then really took off in the 1990s. The key year was 1991. the year that Tim Berners-Lee, working at CERN in Switzerland, invented the World Wide Web. And what you're looking at here is the world's very first web server. In the 90s, we tended to go onto the web using desktop computers. Now, obviously, they didn't look like this in the mid-1990s, but this is the same device type. As the 90s wore on and we got into the 2000s, we also used laptop computers. And then as the 2000s wore on, there was the advent of more mobile devices, such as tablets and, of course, eventually smartphones. Again, smartphones in the early 2000s didn't look like this, but this is the same device type. So a lot of changes in a fairly short space of time. Those of you who are lucky enough to have computers in your classrooms or your schools will know that we've also seen a lot of changes in a short space of time in computer rooms. So this is an older style computer lab here at Phoenix Academy. You can see the students sitting in rows, each one with a desktop computer in front of them. But now we've moved towards more hybrid or blended classrooms. Again, this is a room here at Phoenix Academy, where the technology is scattered around the room and where it's really possible to do blended or hybrid learning, that combination of face-to-face and online learning, and once students are online, that combination of asynchronous and synchronous learning. Okay, I'd like to talk to you now about 3 phases of software development, or if you like, more broadly, digital technology development. And each one of these phases has opened up more possibilities for blended active learning. The first phase is what we might call the Web 1.0 or informational phase. So when Tim Berners-Lee invented the World Wide Web in 1991, he called it the read-write web. His idea was that we could all read what other people had to say, but we could also write our own ideas and share them with other people. But that didn't really happen for the first 10 years or so of the web. So throughout the 90s, that didn't really happen because we did what we often do when a new technology first comes along, and that is we treated it as if it were an old technology. So what we had in the 1990s, and it's captured well in this diagram, was we had a small number of authors producing fairly static content for a very large number of passive consumers. That's the book metaphor, or the library metaphor. Essentially, in the 1990s, we went to the web to look up information. And that's why Web 1.0 is also known as the informational web. Now, despite its limitations, there are a number of learning activities which are aligned philosophically and pedagogically with Web 1.0, and they do still have some value for language learners. For example, we have online translators, where students can translate from their native language into English and back again to look for the differences in the grammar and the vocabulary. We also have thousands and thousands of freely available language learning apps, which you can get from the Apple iTunes Store or from the Google Play Store. Now, actually, the hardware and software here is more recent than Web 1.0, but philosophically and pedagogically, it's aligned with Web 1.0. What we have to remember about mobile educational apps is that often they are technologically very sophisticated, but pedagogically, they're very traditional. They tend to be about information transmission or behaviourist learning. Still, in a supplementary role, they can have a part to play. In the mid-1990s, we also saw the invention of web quests, which were an attempt to build an inquiry-based or task-based element around what was essentially looking up information. So all of these activity types do still have some value for students nowadays. If you're looking for more information about Web 1.0 or informational style activities, you might like to take a look at my freely accessible website, markpigram.com. You can see the address on the screen. There is a section under Tools looking at Web 1.0 learning, and I go through a number of the key tools and techniques there. The things got a lot more interesting with the advent of Web 2.0 or the social web. So by the mid-2000s, 2005, 2006, we had a lot more ordinary users of the web creating their own user-generated content to share with other people. So there were a lot more conversations going on, a lot more discussions, and it wasn't just text that we were sharing. We were sharing images and videos and animations and so on. So this began in about the year 2000. By 2005, 2006, Web 2.0 or the social web was in full swing. And this really opened up new possibilities for blended active learning. So, for example, there's a lot of free polling software which can allow students to see how their answers and their opinions compare to those of their classmates, and which also allows teachers to get a quick snapshot of what students in their class know and believe. Then there is the multimedia or multimodal discussion software. Again, a lot of it freely available, ranging from the asynchronous discussion boards like Padlet through to synchronous video conferencing software like Zoom, and of course it's synchronous video conferencing that we're doing right now. Beyond that, there's blogging software. Again, a lot of it freely available, where students can write their opinions on the web and get responses from other students potentially anywhere in the world. And there are also some big international organisations, such as, for example, the UK-based Quad Blogging, which can help you as teachers to find other classes in other countries that want to blog together with your students. So your students can be practicing not only the English language, but also they can be gaining intercultural skills. Very recently, Robert Godwin-Jones said that language learning classrooms in general need to become more porous, in other words, more open to the world. That's exactly what's happening with Web 2.0 or social web learning. Students are learning in the classroom, but the language they're learning is then being used to communicate out there on the internet, potentially with the whole world. If you're interested in more on Web 2.0 or social web activities, you might like to check out my co-authored book, Digital Literacies. My co-authors and I are working on a new edition at the moment, but it won't be out until the end of next year. In the meantime, though, the original edition is still widely available, and it contains lots of activities for English language learning. You might also once again like to go to my freely available website, markpegram.com, where there's a section on Web 2.0 and where you can read about tools like polling software, logging software, discussion boards, and many more. And you'll find links to the free software that's available. All right, then we come finally to our current phase of development, where things are much more interesting still, much more exciting. This current phase builds on the Web 2.0 or social media phase, but it pushes in a more mobile or contextual direction. A couple more really important years in internet history. So 2013 was the year when smartphones began to outsell feature phones, that's the older, more basic phones, worldwide. Now, there's still a very large installed base of feature phones in the global south, the developing world, but the proportion of smartphones is growing year by year, and that's great news for education because we can do a lot more with smartphones than we can with the old feature phones. 5 years later, we hit another really important milestone. So 2018 was the year when half of the world's population got internet access. And interestingly, in the 2 or 3 years prior to that, a lot more people had been coming online, not through desktop or laptop computers with hardwired internet connections, but rather through mobile devices hooking into mobile telecommunications networks. In fact, by April this year, some 52% of global web traffic was already coming from mobile phones, a lot of it from smartphones. So not only have we moved into a social digital world, we've moved into a mobile social digital world. Most people in the world today using mobile devices are on 4th generation or 4G connections, although 3G and 2G networks are still prevalent, particularly in some parts of the global south. 5G networks are just beginning to roll out. If we have a look at this map of the world and focus on the ASEAN countries, we can see that a number of them have already launched 5G networks and all of them have at least invested in 5G technology. Now, the difference between these different generations is how much data you can transfer how quickly. So you can see a couple of older devices associated with 1G and 2G networks. It wasn't, though, until the advent of 3G networks that we got anything remotely like today's smartphones. 4G networks opened up some important new possibilities in terms of things like streaming videos and movies, online gaming, and also synchronous video conferencing like we're doing right now. 5G networks will open up the possibilities for smart homes, smart classrooms, smart traffic networks, and so on. So building on Web 2.0 and the social web, learning at this level goes a step further because the learning can be taken out into the real world and it can be much more situated, immersive, contextual. For example, students could be out there in the real world using Pinterest Lenses software to scan real-world objects and find out their names in English. Or they could be accessing augmented reality interfaces where they've got digital information about the world around them and where they can also access digital questions and digital tasks which have been left there in real-world locations for them by their teachers and other educators. So this is another example of the porous classroom. So here, the learning is happening out there in the real world, but the results of that learning are being brought back into the classroom for reflection and review. If you'd like more information about mobile and contextual approaches, you could take a look at my book from last year, Mobile Lenses on Learning. There are lots of case studies of mobile language learning projects in both the Global North and the Global South. And once again, you might like to have a look at my website where there is a section on mobile learning. Now, in the next few years, we're going to see the arrival of all kinds of new hardware. For example, augmented reality or extended reality glasses and headsets, which will give us a much more immersive sense of having digital data all around us as we go about our everyday lives. But even these are just a stepping stone on along the pathway towards augmented reality contact lenses. So here we'll be able to carry the screens of digital information with us wherever we go. We're already seeing the arrival of smart assistants all around our living spaces, our studying spaces, our working spaces. These devices themselves are not mobile, but because they're scattered about the spaces in which we live and study and work, we can be mobile and we can continue interacting with our virtual helpers no matter where we are. Of course, social robots have been used for language learning in a number of places in the world, including Japan, South Korea and Taiwan for quite a number of years now, and they're beginning to make inroads into more countries. This particular photo comes from China. Now, this might all seem overwhelming when we look at all of this new hardware. But you know what? As teachers, what's really important is not so much the technology itself, but it's how we use the technology to support our students' learning. As teachers, we really need three kinds of knowledge. We need content knowledge, so we need to know the English language. We need pedagogical knowledge, so we need to know how to teach the English language. And finally, we need a little bit of technological knowledge because we need to know how technology impacts our content and how it impacts our pedagogy. It is highly likely that the best blended active learning designs created by teachers will happen at the intersection of these three domains of knowledge. So where teachers bring together their technological, pedagogical, and content knowledge. And my colleagues are going to tell you more in a little while about how you can actually do this in your own classrooms. But for now, I'm going to pause for a couple of minutes. Shri, do you have time for questions?
We do just have a few minutes, so I do have a couple of questions. There's quite a few that's coming in through the chat. So fantastic. Thank you so much, Mark, Professor Mark. That's been a very insightful session. So if I may, what are the key challenges when teaching a blended classroom?
Okay, it's a very good question, actually. I think there are at least two different sets of challenges. So as I said at the beginning, we can look at two different definitions of blended learning. So one question is, what combination do we want to have of face-to-face and online learning? Sometimes we have a choice in that area. Other times, such as during the COVID era, we might be required to do some or all of our teaching online. But even if we have no choices there, we still have a choice in the second area, which is once students are online, what combination do we do of asynchronous and synchronous learning? So for people who are interested in this, I would suggest having a look at that EduCourse Review article that I mentioned earlier. It's freely accessible. It looks at different models for blending together asynchronous and synchronous learning. So that would be my recommendation.
Perfect. So actually, it goes into the sort of second question. Actually, is about what are the free or easily available resources to support blended language learning specifically? Okay.
Well, the good thing is there are lots and lots of resources, and I mentioned a number of them during my presentation. So, for example, there are thousands and thousands of freely available language learning apps. There's also free software for doing things like polling, for online discussion, for all of that kind of thing, for blogging. If people are looking for links to the free software, they can go to my website, which I mentioned several times. So there are sections there on Web 1.0, Web 2.0, and mobile learning. And in those sections, there are links to some of the free software and platforms that teachers might want to use for their students.
Perfect. Thank you so much again, Professor Mark. If I may ask you to take your seat, and I'll call on your colleague for the next session. Thank you. So for the next segment is Ms. Sandra Houghton, who's a senior teacher trainer for Phoenix Academy, who will be presenting on pedagogical and content knowledge. Over to you, Sandra.
Thank you very much, Sri. And thank you to Mark as well. And it's a pleasure to be with you all. So great to see so many participants joining us today and to be presenting with my colleagues on active learning in the blended and hybrid classroom. So in my section, I'm going to start by introducing us here at Phoenix Academy, what we do, who we are, and that will give you some context to the rest of our workshop. I'm then going to be talking about how here at Phoenix we have 30 years of strong pedagogical and content knowledge, and we've used that as a base to add on our technological knowledge and show you some different technological setups that we've had over the years. And I'm hoping that you will recognise potentially your setup and get some active practical ideas from this session. Okay, so who are we at Phoenix? Phoenix is divided into 3 different schools. We have the School of English, which is our general English programs, our high school programs and our young learners on our beautiful garden campus here in Perth, Western Australia. We also deliver classes from our business school, which is gives pathways into some of the top universities in Western Australia through our academic English program and our diplomas of business programs, for example. And finally, who we're presenting through this afternoon, our Institute of Teaching Excellence, which provides teacher training. So we do TESOL certificates, we do the CELTA course, the Delta course, and customised teacher training here in Perth and internationally. So as I said before, Phoenix was founded 30 years ago by a powerhouse husband and wife team, Robin and Brian Walsh, who are still very much part of the leadership team here at Phoenix. And the foundation of everything that we do at Phoenix is a strong pedagogical and content knowledge. Independent of the context in which we are teaching, the Phoenix Way focuses on a communicative and active classroom. So we use language for real-life communication. We set a context, a real-world task. Our lessons have student-centred aims. Teachers at Phoenix are facilitators, we're helpers, and we adapt our material to meet the needs of our individual students, and we refer to that as differentiation. Now, we recognise that there are many different contexts in which we are all, here at Phoenix and you at home, are all teaching. You may be delivering STEM classes, you might be delivering CLIL classes, ESP, business English, academic English, high school, young learners, or you may be working on those 21st century skills that we know are so important today. Independent of your context, we have isolated 3 different areas that we think need to be maintained when we talk about pedagogical and content knowledge. And as we move into the blended and the hybrid classes, these three areas, if you keep these in mind, we believe that you'll be able to continue to develop active and communicative classrooms in those different contexts. So the three areas are, we believe that teachers need to continue in the blended and hybrid classroom. We need to continue building a rich context. That means that we are basing our lessons around known concepts. Talking about situated learning, which Mark referred to in his section. We are creating engaging environments in which the students can build on their knowledge base. We need to set communicative tasks. That means that we're giving the students the opportunity to communicate with us and each other. Communicative competencies may be changing in the blended and hybrid environment. We might be communicating in different ways now, but we still need to set those communicative tasks and give students the opportunity to do that. We need to also ensure that there is a variety of interaction patterns in our lessons, or that we set up a variety of interaction patterns. And I'm going to talk you through those interaction patterns in a moment. So let's go through those three different areas that we need to remember in communicative and active teaching. So, setting real-life context. Here's an example that you might see from a classic workbook. This is a young learner's activity. I think we're looking at animals, we're looking at colours, and the task here is asking students to read and colour. Now, if we just walk into the classroom and say, today we're going to learn about colours and animals, that's not particularly engaging and it's not particularly active. So how can we set the context in a different way? We might use flashcards. Okay, our traditional flashcards are the physical ones. We might be able to find some flashcards online. If your students are working with a mobile device, you might send them some pictures over WhatsApp or WeChat, or they might send you a picture of their favourite animals. We might show them a video. This is a dingo cam. Here in Australia, we have some cameras set up in I think this is Melbourne Zoo, and you can actually zoom in and see the animals in real life. So you can see that if we compare the two, setting the context in this way is much more engaging, much more active, and we can use some of our different digital technologies here, depending on our context. Some examples of tasks. It's always worthwhile to review the 7 different task types by Willard, starting from listening through to sharing personal experiences. These task types are communicative, they're active. There are some very simple examples here. For example, we might ask students to brainstorm all the animals that they know, or we might do a project which involves students designing their own animals. All of these task types can be done face-to-face, but also through blended learning or hybrid learning. And my colleague Danny will go into a bit more detail about some of these tasks in her section. Now, it's very important to set up a variety of interaction patterns. So here we can see the teacher is orange, the students are also orange, the picture is yellow, the students are orange. This is an example of where the teacher may be talking to all of the students may be talking to each other, for example, in pair work. We might have the students in group work, or we might have one student communicating with all of the students in the class, for example, in a presentation. So important to remember to always set up this variety of interaction patterns, and independent of your context, we can still do that in the blended and hybrid learning. So getting back to what Mark was talking about with PPAC here, I've just talked about how we need to maintain this pedagogical and content knowledge of building rich context, setting communicative tasks and interaction patterns. And now I'm going to talk you through how here at Phoenix over the last 20 or so years, we've been building on this knowledge and adding on our technological knowledge. So I hope that you recognise your context as I'm going through this and get some ideas for what you could do in your current situation. So here you can see a couple of pictures. I think Mark showed some of this. This is the original language lab from Phoenix Academy. It's actually opened in 1989, so you can only imagine what the students were doing in that picture there. And this is the computer lab, which was opened here in 2002 and then upgraded in 2010. So in this kind of context or this kind of setup, students were still interacting with each other through these types of communicative tasks. We were doing things like researching group work and presentations. Obviously, after the internet, we were giving students the opportunity to research current events, share them in group work, emailing each other blog posts, creating surveys to administer, etc. So even in this kind of setup, we still had that communication and the interaction. In 2010, the Phoenix portal was launched. The Phoenix portal is a learning or course management system, or an LMS or CMS. We have many different platforms that you can use: Moodle, Blackboard, Canvas. And on this management system, learning management system, we're still setting up these interaction patterns, allowing for discussion forums, announcements, teachers setting up quizzes, chats, and the opportunity to submit assignments and receive feedback from their teacher or from their peers, or give themselves feedback, so some reflective practice there as well. And here's a couple of screenshots. You can see a teacher on our Phoenix portal setting up the homework. And now we're moving into the stage where we had students using their own devices in class, in face-to-face classes. And this is where we had the opportunity to have what Mark was referring to as that more porous classroom, where students are going out into the real world, working on certain things, coming back to class, getting feedback and interaction with their peers and their teachers, and maybe using their devices in that way. This is a picture of our academic English class. Students obviously doing some group work here and using their mobile phones. Some of the apps that are readily available online that our students use or used in the face-to-face classes are Quizlet. It's kind of like a quizzing app. Kahoot, you may be familiar with. And of course, our social media to communicate with students. So here's an image of a teacher receiving homework just by WhatsApp. So when the students are using their own devices in a face-to-face classrooms, we're still setting up all of these interaction patterns and thinking about the context and thinking about the communication that is involved in these different tasks. And then obviously as the context changed, as we went through the start of the COVID, students were at home, teachers were online, and we needed to start thinking more about how are we maintaining these interaction patterns while we have some students live, and then the teacher on a laptop, for example, and also communicating through our Phoenix portal and on other apps such as Facebook, WeChat or WhatsApp. So, for example, communicative tasks could be that scavenger hunt, and this is where we could be implementing or working with augmented reality. Students could be going out with their own devices, as Mark was referring to, and having that real world experience and then coming back to the classroom. Chatting, project work, internet searches and shares, and obviously using other apps, as I mentioned. And this is where we currently are. So the hybrid classroom, we have students, many students who are in their own countries, overseas, or here in Western Australia, but not on campus or other parts of Australia. And we also have a group of students here in class. So here's our original setup. You can see we had a kind of a trolley system with our e-board, which we've had for many years. whiteboard and the current students. So you can see the students at home using Zoom. And our current setup is slightly different. So you can see behind me now, we have, I can see you at home and the PowerPoint, the students talking on Zoom, for example, or their faces will pop up. And here I have my whiteboard if I need to use it, and I've got my e-board if I need to use it as well. So that's our current hybrid setup here at Phoenix. And what we've noticed in our current hybrid setup is that there's an added element of complication, I guess is one way to say it, where we need to maintain the interaction patterns between our face-to-face students and our live students. So here we've got that added element of the purple live students and the orange face-to-face. So my colleague Danny is going to talk through in her next session how we do that in our current hybrid classes, show you a video of our teachers teaching and give you some more examples, which I hope will be useful for you.
Thank you so much, Sandra. But we have a few minutes for a couple of questions that are coming through.
Thank you, Sue.
Yeah, some of the interesting question is how can we manage a large active learning class? So for instance, if you have a class of 35 to 40 students, for instance.
Yes, and we definitely recognise that that is the reality for many teachers having large classes. And I think it's really important to ensure that some of the ideas that I've been talking about, those pedagogical ideas, remain the same. So even with large classes, we can set engaging context. We can set those communicative tasks. We need to think very carefully about the interaction. We need to manage that interaction, give clear instructions, make sure that the students know what they're doing at all times. And also with large classes, sometimes we just need to accept that they're going to be noisy and a little bit chaotic. And actually in language learning, as long as the students are on task, that's okay sometimes.
Okay, if that's the case, keeping in mind that the whole large class scenario, then how do you implement learning strategies for individual learners in a blended learning classroom then?
So I think, and my colleague Conrad is going to go into differentiation in a little bit more detail. Differentiation is referring to how we can adapt our delivery, our content and our tasks for individual students. But actually in the blended and hybrid environment, it gives us many more opportunities for differentiation, which is adapting for individual students than previously in face-to-face. So it's really making use of the technology to be able to receive evidence from individual students so that we can make some judgments on how we need to adapt our classes or how do we adapt based on the individual students. So as I said, my colleague Conrad will go into differentiation in a bit more detail.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sandra, for now. I will let you take your seat back, and then I'll call upon Conrad. To all attendees, please don't worry. We'll get to all your other questions soon. But actually, our next speaker is Ms. Daniela, who is Ms. Daniela Multari Kugola, the senior teacher trainer also from Phoenix Academy, who will be talking about blended learning in practice. Over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Sheree. I'm just going to get my video ready because I thought it might be interesting for us to think about what it looks like in the classroom when we start. Sorry, I'm just playing with my cursor here. The arrow there. Sorry, it's a little bit small. There we go. Sorry, I'll start that again. So good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to get my video ready for you because I thought it might be quite interesting for you to see how this works in practice. How can we adapt our classrooms to suit the hybrid model? So firstly, There we go. Okay, so Sandra has talked to you about some of the interaction patterns, and I've left that table up for you. But the ones we're mostly looking at are going to be in this final column. So we're focusing on the hybrid classroom. I've got some questions for you to consider here while you're watching the video. So once I start the video, you won't be able to see those questions. So perhaps if you have your smartphone handy, you can take a photo, a screenshot. This is something we do a lot with our students. So you're ready to think about those questions. I'm going back to what Sandra has been talking about. So focus on those three things. We really want to have a clear context, some communicative tasks that will encourage our learners to be active, and the third thing is focusing on the interaction patterns used in the classroom, so looking at this model here. So I'm going to get ready, press play on the video, and I'll see you in a few minutes. Okay, So I know some of you may not have been able to see that, but I know that will be made available to you later. So I'm now going to go over some of the interaction patterns you saw. We can talk about the context and the task. So the first classroom you saw, you can here you can see the teacher has positioned himself over on the side to enable the students in the classroom to talk with their peers online. You can see them on the screen up here. So she has a microphone and she's, it could have been an icebreaker talking about what they're introducing themselves and talking about what they were doing for that day. So that's a nice example of a student in the classroom interacting with the group of students online. So this interaction pattern here. In the next video, next example, you can see the teacher in the top corner here, and the student online is screen sharing some work they've done. So this is a piece of writing, and the teacher is going through and giving the students some feedback on their performance on this writing task. So the student is in control. They know how to share their screen, they know how to allow their classmates online and in the classroom and their teacher to see. And it's a great way then for the teacher to give feedback. They can also annotate on this shared screen. In this classroom, you can see the teacher in the top left-hand corner here setting up the task. It was an opportunity for the students to share their experience with online and face-to-face learning. So it's really good to touch base with your learners and see how they're feeling about the experience. Making everyone feel included in the classroom. I think that inclusivity is so important. It's still one classroom, whether they are online or in the room physically. It's still, you need to ensure that all the learners feel that they're part of that class, and that will really encourage a positive learning environment and motivate your students. I know a lot of you have questions about how to keep the students motivated, and I think ensuring they're all part of those interactions will make a big difference. Here you can see the students in the classroom talking with their peers online, or even, to each other here in the classroom. Just going to go back. I seem to have jumped to the end of the presentation, so just bear with me. I'll go back to where I was. Click away. That's okay. Oh, we're coming there. Please bear with me. So as you see, teachers, we make mistakes with technology. We have to get familiar with whatever we're using and try it out, and it's okay to make mistakes as long as you go with your class and move forward. So the next example you saw was of a student giving an oral presentation and then receiving feedback from their classmates. So this student here is your online student who shared his screen and was receiving feedback from his peer in the classroom. So the teacher could have given some examples of the type of feedback that would be expected. The teacher could have given a marking sheet as well. Okay, so it's really important to set up the task before the students deliver, so they know what they're looking for and they can give very direct feedback on that. Okay, and finally you saw this classroom in action. Yes, that's me teaching. This is a group of general English students about a pre-intermediate level. The topic of conversation, the context really was, talking about customs. We were talking about April Fool's Day in this class, and you could see the teacher nominating the students online for responses to make sure that everyone was included. What about in Japan? What about in Malaysia? So we had students from all across the world, and then in the classroom you can see the student here who was telling a little story to his classmates and they had to use some functional language, which you can see on the whiteboard here, to show interest. Are you serious? You can't, you must be joking. And that made, again, everybody feel included and motivated to participate in this lesson. The final image you can see is really just the way we start a lesson and end a lesson. I think it's really important to greet your learners. I know some have very big classes, you can't go name by name, but certainly nominating some students and opening up that class at the beginning to everyone online and in the classroom, and also ending the lesson so everyone knows what's to come next. Okay, so there's some examples from the way we've been setting context, setting up tasks, and varying interaction patterns here at Phoenix Academy. So I'd like to now move on to looking at a lesson type, a lesson shape or approach to teaching that you've probably all taken. A lot of you, I think, might be teaching young learners, so I've chosen to give an example using storytelling. So in this lesson, you can think about what the focus would be on. I've suggested you could talk about colours or animal vocabulary. The task would be to tell and retell a story, and then the follow-up work could be, for example, create your own story, or as Sandra mentioned in hers, create your own animal if you want to have an art focus. So I'm going through the stages of this lesson, and then we'll look at the face-to-face classroom, the communicative activities that encourage active learning, and then how those have been adapted to the blended classroom. So, for example, you will lead in to this lesson on brown bears, perhaps with a film, a story, a song, encouraging your learners to share what they know on the topic already. So this we would do in the classroom using our resources, our whiteboard or our projectors or whatever we are using to set the context. In your blended classroom, we can do all of these things as well, but we could also ask the students to use what's around them and what they have access to share with the class. So, for example, most students would probably have a smartphone. They can use their phones to search for their favourite animal and then describe it to the class, either orally or typing through a WhatsApp group, for example. You might flip your class and ask the learners to do a little bit of research before they come in to the brown bear lesson and do some research before they come to and share what they know about or what they've learned about brown bears. So there are a couple of examples of what you can do in the first stage. KWL charts are very common as well. I'm sure a lot of you use them. If you don't, then you can certainly search for them. There are many available free online. So where the students are sharing what they already know on a topic, what they would like to know and what they have learnt in the lesson. Well, this can be adapted simply by getting the students to share that information over WhatsApp, for example, or a chat if you're using for Zoom or Teams. Okay, moving on to the second stage. This is where the teacher will observe the language the students have, see what they already know on the topic. So there are some ideas about how you might do that in the face-to-face class, for example, using cards to match colours, or even getting the students to put their hand up or shout out the name of an animal as they see it on a video. And then if we move on in the blended class, same thing. We can do all those things. If they can't if they don't want to shout because it can get quite noisy with all the learners speaking at the same time, ask them to use the chat, type in their answers, hold up cards that they have access to at home, show pictures that they have at home. So moving on to the third stage, where the teacher inputs the language, the teacher finds the gaps in what the students know, what they don't know, and fills the gaps. So it could be, for example, a focus on pronunciation, a focus on language, or feed in some of the vocabulary that the students need. Now, we found in our hybrid classroom that this is a real key point. that you as the teacher need to be very much aware of what this looks like, what the input looks like online. For example, if you're using audio, then you need to ensure that the students can hear it well. Just like with my video today, I needed to check that before and make sure that if they were going to be listening, they would hear that. If they're reading, you need to make sure the font is big enough, if you're sharing a screen, for example. Or perhaps you're simply using a whiteboard like the one I have behind me, then you need to make sure that it's clear. So it's all a really good idea to always look back at what that looks like for the online student. The fourth stage is where we ask the students to redo the task. So if it's storytelling, you may put them into small groups in the classroom and get them to role play or act out the scene from Big Bear, Brown Bear. You would get them to practice and you may even invite an audience for the students. All of these things can also be done in our hybrid classroom, and you've seen plenty of examples of that today where we're asking students to work in groups. With Zoom, you have the option for a breakout room, but not even. It could simply be the class student, face-to-face student could be working together as well. So I think this is a really important one, the praise and the awards. You know, again, motivating students, always encouraging them. That needs to be the case in the blended classroom as well. So the final stage is where we give the students some follow-up work. Perhaps they will do a piece of writing to submit. They may do some art, some drawing with your young learners, create your own super animal with different parts of the body. So in your blended classroom, this can all happen as well. There's nothing wrong with writing on paper, taking a photo of it and sending it to your teacher. And in fact, this is some work from one of my students who had only a smartphone and pen and paper, no problem. Drawing, they can even draw images, hold up their camera to a piece of paper. It's all doable. Over here you can see the students were required to do make a short presentation, send it to the class WhatsApp chat, and then the students could also give their peers some feedback. So all these ideas, and there are many, many more that I've shared with you today, are things that we're trying out in our classroom. And I encourage you to also try those out too. So thank you. Do we have time for questions? Cherie, sorry about my technical glitch there with the video, but I think we got it in the end.
No problem. It's one of those things, you gotta love the WebEx platform. But we're certainly, to all attendees, we will be sending through the webinar recording, so you'll definitely have that view of the video. Unfortunately, there is not enough time, so there's plenty of questions coming at you, Daniela, so I'll save that for the end.
Thank you. I'll be happy to answer them at the end, and I'll hand you over to Conrad now.
Perfect. Yes, please. So may I welcome Mr. Conrad Tepper, the senior trainer from Phoenix Academy, who will be discussing continuing development, teacher development. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Sri. Pardon me. All right, so my name is Conrad Tepper, and I am a senior teacher here at Phoenix Academy. But all the way back in, April, right before COVID hit, I was just a teacher in a classroom with a laptop in front of me, teaching an academic English class. Now, a few months later, I am standing here presenting to thousands of people in a webinar about a topic that I am supposedly an expert at. So how did I actually get here? How do I get to this position where I feel confident enough to actually talk to you about this topic? So as much as this is my area of now expertise, it's also my story as well. So it's really great for me to share that with you. So I'm going to talk about ongoing teacher development. It's all about your professional development. So let's just start by giving a quick rundown of the different types of professional development. So we have two basic types. The first is internal professional development, which is within your organisation. And the next is external professional development, and that's outside your organisation. Within your organisation, you have hopefully the opportunities for PD sessions, which might be more formal, an informal buddy mentoring system. I remember when I first started here at Phoenix Academy, I had a mentor that was working with me and making sure I was doing everything right. We have reflective teaching practices as another example. So this is more of a value-based system, which I will actually talk about in a moment. And there could even just be some informal idea sharing. Moving on to external professional development, and that's really what you're at right now, a webinar, okay? So you made a decision to come here. It's possible that maybe your organisation has even sponsored for you to come here and to join in this webinar, but we'd still say that this is external. It's outside of your organisation. It could be an industry event, it could be a moderation session for you to upskill your ability to moderate certain assessment types. So I want to talk about entering what I call the professional development cycle. So there are two basic main stages if you want to enter this cycle, and you'll actually see a little bit later that you're already in the cycle, spoiler alert. So first of all, you need to identify your required competencies. So whatever context of learning you're in, and a lot of you have large classes, some of you have small classes, you might have a bit of a mix. Some of my classes are fully online, all the students are online, some of them are, all the students are in the class. Every day I have no idea what that might look like. But regardless, I know what my competencies are. What I then do is either using a peer, like an academic manager, or even just myself, I self-evaluate and I find out where the gaps are in my competencies. And I end up with a bit of a checklist here. So I know that I can do this and I can't do that. Well, that peer review stage is actually the first stage in the PD cycle. So by reflecting on your competencies, you have now entered the PD cycle. And the PD cycle goes on to a second stage where you will explore resources. And that's kind of what you're doing right now. You're listening to me talk about a topic, you're listening to Danny talk about a topic, and Mark and Sandra, and maybe you're going to think about these ideas. Maybe you think they're useful, some of them might be, and some of them might be less useful. That's up to you to decide on their relevance. The next stage is experimentation. So what are you going to do with those ideas? You can't just let them sit there and do nothing. You have to enter the next stage, which is experimentation. And that is the scariest stage because something could go wrong. After experimenting, we're going to have to reflect again. We're going to have to decide whether the experimentation with the resources, with the new ideas was successful or not. After we've reflected, then we come back around to exploring more resources, either with a different competency or to actually improve on that particular competency that I tried to improve before. So as I go around this PD cycle, I'm going to begin to tick off my competencies one by one by one. So I want to use an example of a CPD framework. Okay, that's a continuing professional development framework. And something like this can help you to establish what your competencies might be. So I'll use one example to begin with, which is from English Australia. It's freely available. Okay, it's something that a lot of schools implement as an internal framework. And this is what one section of the English Australia CPD looks like. And this is just for the methodology element. And you can see that it has 4 phases. So a teacher will come in and they begin on phase 1 and that have access to resources. So let's just dive into the first resource. The first resource is bringing real life into the classrooms, 5 inspiring ideas. I'm going to click on that. What does it look like? It's a blog. It's a selection of videos. So I'm going to use these resources, I'm going to collect these ideas and I'm going to decide what's relevant for me. And as you could see from that framework before, it's very, very comprehensive. There are a lot of resources available. I now want to talk about another type of framework, and this is a framework which is not from an external organisation. It's something that we use here at Phoenix Academy. And I think it's really the best framework that I've ever seen in my life, mostly because I wrote it. So the reason why I wrote this framework was because of this new learning situation. I found that a lot of other frameworks, they didn't actually satisfy the requirements of hybrid learning. So I decided what the competencies were for my teaching. What did I need to be a successful teacher? So I created this framework. Now this, what you can see now, is the very first stage. I created 3 stages. This is the first one. It's very short. This is what we'd expect of a teacher who walks in on their first day. They need to know all of these. They need to be able to perform these to be in our hybrid classrooms. They need to know how to turn on the computer. Now that might seem quite simple, but what about using basic chat features of Zoom? It's not as simple as just typing your message and pressing enter. There are some other chat features, and I want my teachers to know those features. So I now want to ask you a quick question. Within your organisation, have you established a system to share ideas with your colleagues? Now, we looked at the TPAC system before, and that's going to come into play again here. Well, a lot of you might be using different social media like Twitter, Facebook. We use WhatsApp quite a bit around here at Phoenix Academy, but whatever you choose to use, that's up to you so long as it works for the method. And we've also started what is called Potent, and I'll show you what that is. So Potent is Phoenix Academy's internal professional development page, and it's specifically for hybrid teaching. I'll just show you quickly what that looks like. It's an LMS page, and I think it's really great. I think it's one of the best LMS pages ever, mostly because I made it. So here's one of the entry-level competencies. It's the essential classroom competencies, and for example, something as simple as test the speaker and microphone. Do you know how to do it? Well, if not, here's a resource. And this is a really basic resource. It's just a guide for, it's a Word document for a teacher coming in on their first week, or maybe someone's had some problems. They didn't have quite such a comprehensive understanding. As we move up, it becomes a little bit more complex. So pro-classroom competencies, another level. So let's have a look at professional development, because on our Potent page is where we keep all of our professional development sessions. And you can see on this page here, that might look a little bit familiar, our interaction patterns, which was created by, again, yours truly. You can see that on this page we have our PD recording, presentation resources, and an opportunity for discussion. It's all about creating a community within our community. It's a community of teachers and support staff engaging to make our organisation better. So let's have a look inside an internal PD. So you can see in this photo here, there's me, and here are all our wonderful teachers in our hybrid classroom. You can see our display screens there, and our camera, and our e-boards. Sandra gave you a bit of a sneak peek of all of that. So we run our PDs just like we run our classes. So what did we decide to talk about in this PD? Well, we decided to talk about lesson and activity types and the types of camera angles you use to show those. That might seem familiar from Danny's presentation. We also talked about screen sharing. How much should you share your screen? And which type of camera framing should you use while you're sharing your screen? Now, why did we choose those topics? Well, because we had a look at all of our teachers and their recordings, and we decided that there were certain deficiencies, things that we could make better, so we acted to make them better. So I want to give another example, which is differentiation in blended learning, and that's something that Sandra alluded to before, saying that I shed a little bit more light on that. So differentiation in blended learning comes right about there in the TPAC diagram, in that Venn diagram. in between technological knowledge and pedagogical knowledge. So to understand differentiation, first you need to understand classroom variables. And as I said before, when I walk into a classroom, it's not going to be the same every time. Today, my class had 1 in-class student and 7 online students. Now, for some of you, you're probably thinking, wow, that's not that many at all. But the point being is that it's different to the class I was teaching yesterday, which had 20 online students and 8 in-class students. So it just changes. So let's have a look at these variables. Firstly, we have the teacher-controlled variables, and that's what a student learns, how they learn it, and how the student demonstrates their learning. So we decide these. The next is student-controlled, and we have no control over this. That is the student's readiness level, their particular interests, and also their preferred mode of learning. Now, as you saw in that video of our classroom interactions, there was a student who's here in Perth, but she chooses to learn online, and we allow her because that's what she prefers. So how does this relate to differentiation? Well, differentiation is basically this, the teacher-controlled elements matching this. So again, here's a bit of a rundown of what we can change. So we can't change necessarily the student profile, but there are things that we can change. We do have power over. You should never think that the situation, the context is just the way it is and there's nothing you can do about it. So let's have a look at an example of differentiating in blended and hybrid contexts, looking at the product of speaking. So here's an example of our online portal voice recorder. A student can record their voice, just like Daniel was saying before that a student can use their smartphones to record a presentation. We can embed that on our LMS to make it a more formalized activity. And here's an example of a hybrid tutorial. We've got students in the class and we've got a student online. They were all doing the same assessment, but we have to allow for our online students to participate. It's all about opportunities. That's it. It's our responsibility as educators to provide as many opportunities as possible for our learners. It doesn't matter what type of learner that happens to be. So you're probably asking, where should you begin in this PD cycle? Well, as I alluded to before, you're already in a PD cycle because you've decided that you want to join this webinar, you want to explore. So you're somewhere around here, and now it's your job to go over here and experiment. You might have seen some ideas that are exciting or relevant. So it's your job to jump into that. So I just want to finish up on this slide here. You're probably looking for more resources and more ideas. And Sri has told me she's going to share this with you, so don't worry about pulling your smartphone out and taking a quick photo. It's okay. We're going to send this to you. We're going to share with you a special resource for all you ASEAN attendees, which is a link to our Phoenix Institute of Teaching Excellence page, where you can have see a little more snapshots of teaching here at Phoenix, along with a whole host of resources for you to use. So that's it for me. I'm just going to hand back over to the hosting over to Sri, and then we're going to join our panelists here for a Q&A.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Conrad. And yes, please do take your seat back with all the panelists for our panel discussion. Thank you to all our experts today. It's been a very insightful session, certainly. And to our attendees, thank you so much for the flood of questions. I've taken note of all of them, as many as possible, as well as your registration questions that you had provided as well. So we'll try to endeavor to get through as many as possible, but please bear with us. If we can't, I will try to respond to them a little later. So to kick off straight away, we are coming close to the end of the day. So to start off, let me head some of the questions to you, Conrad. The first question is, what skills are most important to teachers to create a blended learning course?
I don't want to talk specifically about skills. I want to really more talk about values, because the skills come from you have values. The value is curiosity and really not just taking it for what it is. You have to adapt. If you're not adapting, then you're not surviving. It's not enough to merely survive in this situation. Our learners want exciting experiences in their classroom. And if we're not delivering, that's on us, and we have to figure out a way to adapt. So
I do apologize, Conrad. Can I interrupt you? It's a little bit unclear. Could you maybe move in front or move the mic, please? Perfect.
Yep, sure.
Is that a little bit better?
Yes. Perfect.
Wonderful.
Okay. So I just want to, I'll summarize that for you. So really just having this mindset of always adapting and not just letting things lie. If you're having problems, you have to go out there and explore ideas, and you have to experiment. You have to do that. You have to put yourself in a situation where you might fail. And I failed many times in the classroom. This is our first time using WebEx, for example, and it didn't go smoothly. But you know what we're going to do afterwards? We're going to reflect on the whole process, and we're going to try and make sure that our next WebEx performance is a lot better. So that's really all it is.
Actually, as a follow-up question to you, based on research, what's the most effective modality of teacher professional development?
I would say peer review works really well. I mean, if I can just go from what we've learned here, the more that teachers watch each other and the more that they watch themselves, the better they perform. I feel confident being in the hybrid classroom because my job is to edit teachers' videos. I do it every day. I watch teachers' videos. I watch the good, I watch the bad, I watch the better. So I see the whole range of activities and strategies, and I know what works. And it's not because I figured that out, it's because there's a whole bunch of other teachers figuring this out, and I'm learning from them. So watch yourself and watch other teachers.
Perfect, thank you. So I'm just going to jump it for all our panelists. Please jump in whenever you see fit. There's a couple of questions, like I said, from the chat, which are live, as well as from the registration form. We'll kick off with an easy but maybe tricky question. Which is better, face-to-face, online, or blended learning?
Blended. Blended. Absolutely. I mean, we've gone through all the stages, face-to-face. I've been teaching for 22 years. Back in the day when we didn't even really use the internet all that much. These days, it allows for. I think what we have to really remember is there's a whole spectrum: low tech, high tech, students in the class, students at home. The key principle is it's one classroom, and good teaching is always good teaching, but what blended delivery has enabled us to do is reach out to a wider audience and really, give us the tools. That's right, Sandra, give us different tools to try different things. The tasks are the same. Communicative tasks are the same in that, communication is always important, but it's how you can change it up for students online and face-to-face.
Can I just add something to that? Because we recently had a change of mindset, which was when we came into this, the technology dictated what we did in the classrooms. And I saw teachers and myself changing our styles of teaching based on what we thought that we could and couldn't do. Whereas it should be the other way around. You should be teaching as you know you can. You are a good teacher, probably, hopefully, already. So all the technology is doing is facilitating what you're already doing. So the technology works for you, you don't work for the technology.
Can I just add something to that? Just wanted to say, actually, as teachers, we have a repertoire of tools already. So we have our whiteboards and our pens and our paper and so on. And what we're doing with blended learning is adding to our repertoire, because you've got the blogging software, you've got the discussion board software, and so on and so forth. So actually, it really opens up the possibilities for different types of interaction at different times. So to echo what Danny said to begin with, I would agree. I think blended learning has a lot of advantages because we have the strengths of face-to-face learning, but also the strengths of online learning.
And I might just add to that as well. Sorry, Shri. We're all going to talk on this because we're so passionate about blended learning. I think it's really important, and what Conrad said, to remember is that good teaching is good teaching. But you really need to make sure that the tools that you have work for you. So it's taken a really long time for us here at Phoenix to have the setup, the technological setup that we currently have, and it's been experimentation and it's been working together, reviewing videos, etc. I don't know, Shri, if you can just hand back the control to us. So I just wanted to show again quickly our camera setup and the way that we use the platform that we use is Zoom when we're teaching. Yep. So here you can see Danny's just going to show us a few different camera angles that we have. So here, this is her presenter view where she could write on the whiteboard. Here we might show kind of half of the class. She might be working on the e-board as we are. If you click over to the other camera, Danny,
So something
webcam.
that we want to do is to add other cameras into the classroom, because we found that most of the students are facing the whiteboard, for example, and we want our online students to face the students. So when there's discussion, it feels like they're interacting with them a little bit more. So adding extra cameras can be a little bit complicated sometimes, but you know, if it works, it works, and it's just another flavour in the whole recipe.
Yeah. Yeah, so we just wanted to show you, maybe it's a bit clearer now in our presentation. It might have been a little bit small. It's just a little bit clearer now to show you what we're currently working with, and just encourage everyone to keep working with the technology that you have and learning about further technologies that you can implement.
Okay, there is a good flood of questions coming through, so let's just move along. The next one I think might actually be for Mark. What mechanism can you suggest to assure quality evaluation of the students' performance when they're adopting a blended and online class?
Okay, well, again, I think, evaluation has a lot of the same principles whether you're doing it face-to-face or online, but there is one major advantage online, which is you have records of everything. So you can record student interactions, for example. You can review those later. You can have transcripts of conversations. So actually, as with the tools, the teaching tools in general, it really opens up the possibilities. So you're still evaluating the same kinds of things, but you've often got those permanent records. It can make it easier to go back to those to reflect on what students have done. So students to self-reflect as well as a first stage of assessment before the teacher evaluation comes in over the top.
Yeah, and I want to add to that, like that idea of a record as well, which is great if you have a flipped classroom. So if you've got students that are learning at home and you give them homework, which makes up the large majority of their time learning, how do you know they're actually doing it? Well, because we have these embedded features in the LMS like activity completion records and logs online, we know whether they've actually gone into an activity, if they've completed it, what time they've done that. I mean, we wouldn't know that at all otherwise.
So this might be...
Yeah, sorry, Shri.
Sorry. There's more questions, I promise. So the next little question, though, I think might be for everyone here is, how do you motivate students who are passive in an online class in a synchronous classroom?
I might jump in and start with that one. I think Danny mentioned it with hers. I think motivation often comes from the student feeling involved in the class. So yes, you might have a very big class, but still using a few students' names, calling on students or nominating students, making sure that they know what they need to be doing and that they are getting some kind of interaction with the teacher, even in the blended class, whether it's through the chat, whether it's a quick good morning or a see you later. That kind of contact with the teacher is really important to motivate students. That's one thing. I'm sure others have other ideas.
Here at Phoenix Academy, we're using Zoom, and one of the great things about Zoom is you can really control the image of the teacher, I guess, which is really important, that the students can see the teacher at that important part of the class when they're being, questioned, if they're using the whiteboard, but also it enables us to show the whole class. So motivation comes from feeling included and also being accountable. I think we have to make the students accountable for their learning. I've seen a few questions come up about independent learning, and being autonomous is very important, obviously. So a lot of learner training has to take place as well on how to use the technology, how to use the chat, how to use, whether they're using a chat on Zoom or WhatsApp. We assume our students know this because a lot of them are digital natives, but actually it's definitely worth going through and showing it as part of your training and your lessons. And then I think once they feel like they've got mastered that, they will feel more motivated and they will feel part of the class, and therefore they will participate for sure.
I think as a bit of a last question at the moment, so I think I'll pick quite a hard one for you.
Okay, sure. It's the hardest to last.
I know. How can we avoid students cheating or sharing answers during a quiz or a test among themselves, particularly when you're in a blended scenario?
Who wants to tackle that one? Conrad?
So there's a variety of methods, and of course we've had the same issues that everyone has once you go online. When you go to university, for example, you might have to submit your papers into software like Turnitin, which I'm very familiar with because I'm currently studying and I have studied before. And it does give you a report on your plagiarism, for example. But not everyone has access to something like that, and just brute force going through Google searches and copy pasting your students' responses into Google and trying to figure out if they've copy-pasted themselves is not necessarily the best thing to do. So how do we get around that? Well, you have to make sure, first of all, that you have really high standards of referencing established in the classroom. So if there are any outside ideas entering into their work, the students feel empowered to actually the students have the tools to reference themselves. So they know quotation, paraphrasing, summarizing. If they don't know how to do those, then they're probably going to plagiarize. The next part of that is also making sure that the prompt that they're responding to is highly personalized. So if you give them a very generic question, they can probably find that generic answer anywhere. So it's really important that you think a little bit outside the box when it comes to asking them a question, whether it's writing or reading.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And regretfully, we have now officially run out of time. So for the time being,
we love questions.
There's plenty more. So, in the meantime, may I thank all the experts here today from the University of Western Australia and from Phoenix Academy for your interesting and insightful session. I think the ASEAN teachers today on the line have hopefully found it very productive. And to our attendees, thank you so much for your attention and for your time. It's been a great engagement, I think, and we'll be sharing now the slides exactly for our next session, which will be held tomorrow. The topic is digital tools and strategies for enhancing learning through English as a medium of instruction. It is our last session for this series, so please feel free to register. Registrations are still open until midnight today, I think is the thing. So there's a QR code as well as a link that will be provided through the chat. Please note that an email will be sent soon in the next couple of days with the webinar recording, so you can see it as many times as you would like, as well as some of the resources that are being provided by Phoenix Academy, which is so that you have that available to you. And please don't forget that a survey as well as an e-certificate will also be sent to you in a couple of weeks, so you have that as well. So may I once again thank everybody here on the webinar for your time and your attention. And if I may, from Austrade, please wishing you a safe and healthy week ahead. Goodbye.
Thanks, Sri. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Sri.
Thanks, everyone.